Chapter 23. How does your garden grow? Months had passed since my time in the market. The first community garden had opened up. Fox and I had a ribbon cutting for it, and people were participating in larger numbers than we had expected. It was wonderful to be able to drive by on any given day and see people working in the gardens. To my surprise, information about the gardens showed that the vast majority of space was being dedicated to food and herbs, and very little was put aside for flowers. The citizens seemed to have decided on their own that they wanted to use the gardens for practical purposes. I won't lie when I say that made me happier than if they had decided to use it for flowers. The point of the garden was to encourage self-sufficiency, and here they were doing precisely that. After what I had seen in the market, many of my questions had been answered. A lot of my anxiety about what Alan and Jessica had said had faded. People were willing to set themselves back and take a diminishment in their current lifestyle for the possibility of a life free of the stress of the machine they had been born into. If it weren't for the surety of what my friends had said, my worries would have been completely gone, though they never would have come up in the first place if they hadn't said anything. I still kicked myself for not realizing for myself what was so obvious to them. After so many lifetimes, I figured I had my everything understood when it came to leading people and system building. But every lifetime had been in a different world, requiring different approaches under different circumstances. A lot of my success in the wasteland had been built on deception and information manipulation, not so subtle threats, and weaponizing faith and the most dangerous people in the wasteland. The results were excellent, even if the means by which they were achieved were questionable at best. Westeros hadn't been much different. I started with lies and manipulation. I used charm and foreknowledge to carry me a considerable way through the first 3 decades, and most of my poignant moments were because of the various abilities I had gained over time. Not so much my ability to get something done. I manipulated friends and allies, forced myself into critical points of wars and negotiations, and even used outright lies to get the results I needed. "Hey," I said, looking up at Jessica, who sat with me in the back of the Delaman cab. "Am I a bad person?" Jessica looked down at me, her face scrunched in confusion. "A bad person? What the hell is making you ask something like that?" Alan asked. He was sitting on my other side and was now looking at me like the question didn't make sense. I looked between them, then down at my lap. I was just thinking. In the wasteland and Westeros, I didn't exactly use the best methods to achieve my goals. I did a lot of lying and manipulating. I sacrificed the lives and reputations of a lot of people as well. "You're not trying to get all philosophical on us today, are you?" Alan asked with a sigh. "We got dressed like this because you wanted to go to the community garden without drawing attention, and now you're trying to get into a discussion about whether the ends justify the means." He was right. He and Jessica had put on cheaper, more common clothes to look like a married couple, while I was wearing kids' clothes to look like their daughter. We wanted to blend as a family so we could go to the community gardens. I had been wanting to go myself, but I didn't want to get mobbed with attention. So, we came up with the idea of acting like a small family. I had braided my hair and used a touch of magic to make it brown for the day. "What's got you asking this?" All of a sudden, Jessica placed a hand gently on my back, smiling to keep my spirits up. The kind of smile that was meant to encourage someone to share what was not their mind. Not placate them. "It's just," I sighed. "I know that what I wanted to do to people was achieved mostly by lying to people, manipulating them, and sometimes killing those who got in my way. Even in the wasteland, you argue that I was enslaving the nation because many people only complied, because they didn't want to fight the Legion." Alan huffed. "I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass and tell you everything you did was good, but your goals were. From everything in the brain dances and what you've told me, you were bringing the wasteland back to a healthier, safer, radiation-free version of what it used to be. If you had to break a few eggs to do it, who cares?" Jessica reached over and gave Alan a swat to the back of his head. "That's not what she's asking, and you know it." She let out a frustrated breath and looked down at me. "You did what you thought was right at the time. You worked in the environment and with the tools you had available. A post-apocalyptic world like the wasteland isn't exactly the place to find clean moral pathways." Alan shrugged. "You say it could be argued that you enslaved the entire country, but someone could just as easily say you forced them to have a better quality of life. You made roads, removed the radiation, and built communities as you went. And people could say I enslaved the mercenaries and other groups when I forced them to join the Legion. I countered. Alan laughed. You're worried about what people think when you made a bunch of thieves and murderers join you in reclaiming the nation from an apocalypse. Stop dismissing her feelings, jackass. Jessica barked and slapped Alan in the back of the head once again. She gave him a warning glare before looking down at me and softening her expression. Merida, I'm not going to pretend that everything you've done has been a good thing. You've done pretty horrible stuff in the time we've been going through all of this. But, she paused, more like hesitated. It was like she was either using or trying to ignore the PR speech she'd learned from Arasaka to give me her honest thoughts. You had some amazing goals to accomplish. And the things you did to achieve them, most of them probably weren't necessary. And some of them were pretty terrible, if I'm being honest. Don't get me wrong, I understand that they were likely the easiest and most surefire way of getting past the step that they fell into. I'm sure there were more moral and less extreme methods of achieving those steps. But that's not you, Alan jumped in. You're an end-goal person, and you do whatever it takes to achieve your goals and make them last. Don't worry about what other people think in hindsight. History doesn't give a shit about what you did to get the results you wanted. It only cares about the results. So if someone thinks you went too far, fuck 'em. They weren't there and they weren't the ones making the choices. He turned and grinned down at me. Besides, knowing you do bad things sometimes makes us all feel like you're still human. You've got a mean little devil in you, and it's cool to know you let it out to play every so often. Hell, I definitely wouldn't want to get on your bad side. I mean, you beat the shit of me once just because Io thought Alfric might not cook for you again. He leaned back against the seat and put his arms behind his head. But all this shit we're going through would be boring as hell if you were perfect and did everything right. There was a pause, a moment where he fell into something deeper, finding a place where his outlook and his care for me intersected. I could feel it like a hitch in his mannerisms. He let out a breath through his nose. But I'll say this. I don't care whether what you did makes you a bad person or not. But if you think you might be, and if it nags at you that much, take a closer look at yourself. You've done some heinous shit. But only you can really figure out if it made you a bad person. I stared up at him. There was a mixture of relief and heartache when he said I was still human. I wanted to believe I was. I was glad he thought I was. But for years now, I'd been wondering if that were truly the case anymore. I didn't respond. Not to either of them. I let my reply die in my throat and expelled it as a sigh through my nose. I sat back against the seat and stared straight ahead. Maybe they were right. I wasn't perfect. And I did go to extreme measures, sometimes horrifying measures, to get what I wanted to get to the next step. I'd murdered, stolen, lied, manipulated, silenced denouncing voices. I wasn't perfect. I could be a monster, but I was a monster that created kingdoms, nations, and empires. A monster that improved the lives of everyone around me after I rid the world of the chaff that mired in it. But was I a monster that wanted or needed control? Did I need to keep my hands on the reins once things had been set in place? I wasn't trying to control anything in this life. There were already systems and governments in place. They just needed a bit of cleaning. But even without intending to lead anyone, people still saw me as a leader, or some kind of symbol. Alan and Jessica had helped make that very clear. If I might make an observation, Delamon's voice rung through the cabin as his face appeared on the hanging screen. Oh good, Alan chuckled. The car's going to get philosophical with us now, Delamon continued, undeterred. Based on analysis of your Mia Braindance series and recorded historical parallels, your behavioral pattern across prior lifetimes is consistent. I blinked and looked up at the screen, shifting slightly in my seat. How do you mean? You enter unstable or inefficient system, Delamon replied. In each world, you encounter and identify structural weaknesses, points of failure, and inefficiencies. You then apply the most reliable method available within that environment to produce stability and long-term sustainability. Alan smirked at me. Isn't he just saying what I said, only better? Delamon continued. The methods you use differ depending on environmental constraints. In Thedas, you utilized your social and hierarchical standing to effect political change. In the Wasteland, coercion, force consolidation, and resource control were most optimal. And in Westeros, information asymmetry, political manipulation, and influence networks were what worked best. Obviously, you also used strategic removal of opposition to ensure your methods would succeed. but nearly every great leader in history has done the same. Shen. There was a brief pause before he continued. In this current environment, if I were looking at this as a new life for you and assuming that your brain dance series are legitimate memories, then I would say that you've acknowledged that those methods are no longer optimal. I sat up slightly, in eager anticipation in what he would say next, growing inside me. You are instead employing distributed system design using behavioral influence through shared knowledge, and decentralized self-sufficiency models, reinforced with celebrity status. Jessica tilted her head slightly, so she's doing the same thing she always has, just differently. Correct, Delaman confirmed. Her objective has remained consistent across all observed lifetimes: maximize stability, improve quality of life, and reduce systemic suffering. The only outlying factor in this current iteration is that she is not attempting to be the legal or recognized figurehead. I swallowed slightly as I digested what he was saying. The distinction you are struggling with, Delaman said as he focused on me once again, is not one of morality but of method of selection relative to environment. You are struggling to justify individual actions with a larger overarching narrative, applying your individual actions against the resulting system you put in place. These are not the same thing. This is more akin to a hunter killing another man who is trying to steal food he caught, to provide food for his starving family. Actions which can be perceived as negative can still produce good results. You cannot simply say an action was good or bad in a vacuum. The context of the reason behind the action is crucial to come to a better understanding. In the end, your behavioral pattern is consistent. Whether that pattern is morally acceptable is not something I can determine. There was a long pause after Delamain concluded his observation. My eyes searched the floor for several long moments before I gazed up at the screen. Thank you, Delaman. I appreciate your insight. Of course, Delaman replied. I'm happy to assist. The rest of the car ride was quiet. The few minutes left passed with each of us in our thoughts, but the silent contemplation was shattered when Delaman pulled up to the community garden. We have arrived at your destination. I hope you enjoyed your ride once again, Miss Oradum. I smiled at the screen as Alan and Jessica opened their doors to exit the car. It was an experience as always, Delaman. Thank you. The car drove off once we were all on the sidewalk next to the entrance to the garden. We hadn't brought any equipment since the real goal was to walk through and see how things were going. We entered the gardens and began our walk. All around were groups of friends and families tending to different spots in the gardens. The gardens were a wonderful example of what this world's technology could do for growing crops. Drip irrigation systems, recycled water, and some soil enhancement technology allowed for more growth that the desert would typically allow. The area Night City resided in was hot, dry, and sun-heavy, so it was no surprise to see people growing things like corn, beans, chili peppers, tomatoes, garlic, and onions. It was a nice surprise to see them growing cilantro, mint, agave, and aloe. Every inch of soil had been claimed with little signs showing what was being grown, when it was planted, and instructions on how to care for it. Men, women, and children smiled and laughed as they spoke about what they would be doing with the food they would be growing, different dishes they would cook, remedies they would make. There was laughter and smiles as the idea of seeing the fruits of their labor danced in their imaginations. It was a wonderful thing to see as we passed through, taking in the sights and sounds of a community coming together in something so fundamentally basic as growing food. We had walked for nearly half an hour through the gardens when something grabbed our attention. Raised voices cut through the low hum of conversations and soft working of soil and trowel. We did what you said. We followed it, but it wasn't working. I stilled. Alan and Jessica paused with me as we looked to the source of the commotion. At the edge of one of the larger plots, a small group stood just outside a low, makeshift barrier of repurposed wood and mesh. On the other side, rows of crops stretched in neat, deliberate lines, while on the other side of the path beans climb up trellis in dainty arches over peppers sprouting in small patches. Well, you must have did something wrong, a man replied. Look around. Everything else is growing just like she said it would. A.T. This isn't something she's given advice on before, the original voice replied. We moved around to find that the voice belonged to an older woman. These are medicinal herbs. She's focused on growing vegetables and spice herbs in her streams. A man who looked to be in his 40s sighed and shook his head. I understand that, but right now you're using this space inefficiently. If nothing grows here, it's not productive. We can't have that. Alan looked down at me, his eyes searching me. You going to step in? Maybe bark him down for being like that in a community garden. I looked away from the scene and up at Alan. He thinks he's defending me and my methods. That's not your choice to make. The woman protested, looking up at the man. It's a community garden. You don't get to choose what can and can't be tried here. But if you aren't getting results, you're wasting the space and the time of the community. Even you have to agree that she wouldn't want the space wasted. The woman went silent. Jessica placed a hand on my shoulder. I know what you're thinking. He's not wrong about you hating wasting effort and space. She's trying, though, I replied, keeping my eye on the scene. She's doing her best, and that's not wasted effort. I turned and began to head back to the garden's entrance, my mind swirling with the idea that my own preferences and methods were being used to shame someone who was just trying to grow some medicinal herbs in a garden meant for everyone. I didn't even know how to approach that yet. But I did know what the next bit of gardening advice I would giving on my next live stream.